Hello, my name is Nicolas Espejo and I'm a visiting fellow at Kellogg College in Oxford University and UNICEF consultant. In this class about the rights of the child, we will cover 5 points. Basic notions, the child as a rights holder, main treatise on the rights of the child, current issues, and UNICEF. A child is a person in the early stages of her life. It is also a member of a generation referred to by adults as children, who temporarily occupy the social space created for them by adults and referred to as childhood. Age is widely used for definitional purposes. According to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, a child means every person under 18 years of age, unless, under the law applicable to the child, majority of age is attained earlier. Most societies recognize some distinctions between infants and toddlers on the one hand and youth adolescents on the other. On that basis, usually they regulate the legal consequences of delinquency, labor, or medical decisions, among many others. For many generations, a paternalistic view of the welfare of the child allowed authorities to decide what is in the child's best interests, regardless of her views. Against this background, child law recognizes that children have 3 types of interests. On the one hand, they have basic and developmental interests. These 2 interests cover the necessary means to sustain a healthy life, including psychological well-being and the development of their capacities. Basic and developmental interests are legally recognized through the rights to life, to corporal and mental integrity, to health, to education, and to play, among many others. On the other hand, children also have a 3rd interest in autonomy, meaning to have access to the most propitious environment for the development of their own personality and the shaping of their lives. From these concurrent interests follows the idea of progressive autonomy. If children are considered as right bearers, then adults must listen and take into account children's points of views. Yet, a child's decision must be revised in accordance with the evolution of his or her personality. A crucial element in any justice system is the age at which offenders are obliged to take responsibility for their criminal actions. If too high, there is a risk that the law will be widely flouted. If too low, the law risks being savagely harsh. At the same time, any decision about the criminal responsibility of a child has to consider his or her progressive autonomy. While we accept that children, especially adolescents, might rationally understand the consequences of their actions, that doesn't mean that they have to be considered fully autonomous from a moral point of view. So, how child law deals with this dilemma? The CRC requires governments to establish laws and procedures regarding children accused of or convicted of criminal offenses, and to set a minimum age below which children shall be presumed not to have the capacity to infringe the criminal law. The BEIJING rules state that the beginning of the age of criminal responsibility for juveniles shall not be too low. At the same time, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child urges states not to set it below the age of 12 and suggests instead between 14 and 16 years as appropriate. International private law instruments, such as the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction, seek to protect children from the harmful effects of abduction and retention across international boundaries. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child of 1989 establishes negative and positive obligations for the state to respect and guarantee children's rights. By July 2014, 194 states had ratified the CRC, making it the most widely accepted instrument of human rights in international law. The CRC is based on the recognition of the child as a holder of rights. This includes the rights to fulfill his basic social and cultural needs, to develop all his potential, and to be free from violence. It also encompasses the right to express his views and to have them taken into account, as well as having access to justice. Some principles are accepted as the basic core of child law. Among them, the principles of non-discrimination, the best interest of the child, and parental responsibility. The CRC also recognizes the rights of children to be heard, to education, to be free from violence or abuse, and to due process, etc. Non-discrimination. This principle provides protection not only to the child, but also to his or her parents, guardians, or family members. Because children are highly dependent on their families, the CRC tries to avoid any form of discrimination based, for example, on the sexual or gender orientation, nationality, or race of his or her parents. Best interest of the child. In all actions concerning children, the best interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. This requires a judgment about the child's interests, not of his or her parents or other relevant interests. The best interest of the child is a threefold concept. A substantive right. This principle must be respected whenever a decision is to be made concerning a child, a group of children, or children in general. An interpretative legal principle. The interpretation that most effectively serves the child's best interests should always be chosen. A rule of procedure. Decision-making process must include an evaluation of the possible impact on the children concerned. Parental responsibility. The CRC recognizes the family as the natural environment for the growth and well-being of children. Accordingly, the CRC obliges states parties to respect the responsibilities, rights, and duties of parents or other persons legally responsible for the child, to provide appropriate guidance in the exercise by the child of his or her rights. Also, the CRC mandates states parties to ensure that both parents have common responsibilities for the upbringing and the development of the child. It also recognizes that parents or legal guardians have the primary responsibility for the upbringing and development of the child. Thus, the CRC supports shared parental responsibility over the responsibility of the state. When exercising these responsibilities, parents or guardians should offer direction and guidance in a child-centered way through dialogue and example. It is estimated that 168 million children aged 5 to 17 are engaged in child labor globally. Some 150 million of them below the age of 14. In addition, millions of children suffer slavery and slavery-like practices such as forced and bonded labor, child soldiering, sexual exploitation, or are used by adults in illicit activities. There is progress, but it's too slow. At current rates, more than 100 million children will still be trapped in child labor by 2020. Child labor is often hidden. This is the case of the estimated 15.5 million child domestic workers worldwide, mostly girls. Many factors account for child labor: poverty, social norms condoning it, migration, emergencies. Although many children work to support their families, their well-being is impaired and their future heavily affected. Child labor is not only a cause, but also a consequence of social inequities reinforced by discrimination. Children from indigenous groups, lower castes, or migrants are more likely to drop out of school to work. Child labor is preventable. The 2010 Roadmap for Achieving the Elimination of the Worst Forms of Child Labor by 2016 and its follow-up Brasilia Declaration on Child Labor provide guidance for a response to it. Millions of children worldwide suffer abuse every day. Especially vulnerable are children with disabilities, orphans, or otherwise marginalized children, such as those living on the streets. Younger children are, as a rule, more vulnerable. Abuses are often practiced by someone known to the child. Only a small proportion of abuses are reported and investigated. Consequently, few perpetrators are held accountable. Exploitation and abuse can severely affect the child's physical and mental health and impair her future development. Around the world, thousands of boys and girls are recruited into government's armed forces and rebel groups, many by force, to serve as combatants or in other roles. Girls are also recruited for sexual purposes or forced marriage. As emphasized in the United Nations report on the impact of armed conflict on children, these children are exposed to tremendous violence, often forced to witness and commit violence, while themselves being abused, injured, or even killed as a result. More than 100,000 children have been released and reintegrated into their communities since 1998 in over 15 countries affected by armed conflict. UNICEF, a UN specialized agency, promotes the legal prohibitions against the recruitment and use of children by armed forces and armed groups. To this effect, it is fundamental that states ratify and implement the optional protocol to the CRC on the involvement of children in armed conflict. UNICEF works in more than 190 countries and territories to help children from early childhood through adolescence. The world's largest provider of vaccines for developing countries, UNICEF supports child health and nutrition, good water and sanitation, quality basic education for all boys and girls, and the protection of children from violence, exploitation, and AIDS. Thank you for joining us in this class. Please visit our website moocchile.com.